And we're giving parents a choice. And in order to do that, we cannot have one-size-fits-all rules.
Ready, set, showtime. Welcome to the Montana Majority Report. Quick, transparent, and informative. Get the inside scoop on policies, people, and decisions shaping our state, all in less time than it takes to pour your morning coffee. Stay tuned. Montana starts right here.
I'm Senator Lenz. I represent Senate District 25 out of Billings. You're on the Montana Majority Report. We're talking today about daycare in Montana. Interesting subject. Myself, I've been in the legislature for since 2013. Most of the time on human services in one form or another, chairing and vice chairing. And recently interested in daycare in Montana and how that fits into human services. But I'm also here with former Representative Jennifer Carlson out of Churchill, and she is interested in daycare too. Representative.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. It affects a lot of people, and in the last few years, it's really gained popularity as a talking point, I guess you could say. Nationally, there's a huge movement to what I would say industrialize daycare, where as a mom of 5 kids, I've always thought that we would want our kids to have the most home-like setting possible. So in the, I don't necessarily fit the national style of a mold. My goal would be to help promote home daycare and facilitate that as a livelihood for people who want to stay home with their kids, or maybe have a few other kids and develop a home daycare so that the children in their community can have a home-like setting to be in if their parents need childcare.
That is, I agree fully, but that's presented an interesting dilemma for us. The executive branch, Department of Public Health and Human Services, moved forward a 95-page rule package in the interim that was quite, well, I already said 95 pages, quite expansive, and didn't necessarily lean towards family daycares, smaller daycares, that moved more towards the bigger daycares and accommodating what that looked like, which put us in a situation. We objected in interim committee, of which you were on, and I was chair. We formally objected. What that means in the legislature is that when you formally object, it takes it through the end of the legislature. If the legislature doesn't do anything, then it will go into effect. So what we've been working on is a package that would direct the rules the way the legislature would like to see, to modify them back. 95 pages was many definitions, many things that were just a little too over the top. But we realized as we talked that family daycares weren't well defined in law. So bringing forward with Ms. Carlson another bill on family daycares to define that better. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, we've been working on that for many months. We want to get it right. We want what we offer to the legislature to be well received by not just a small amount of people in the legislature, but really broadly, because it is important to everybody who needs daycare. But last session, the legislature passed a bill that said if a home daycare was previously licensed or currently licensed by Department of Defense, which is required for a military spouse, so that would mostly apply to the Great Falls area where Malmstrom is. If a military spouse is providing childcare in their home, they have to be licensed by the Department of Defense, and we recognize that as equivalent to a state daycare registration, so home daycare. And so I really looked at those rules, which ironically, the Department of Defense rules for home daycare is 5 pages or 5 or 6 pages. Very brief. I mean, we don't have a whole page of how to wash your hands. It says you should wash your hands. We can assume that people are smart enough to be able to do some of these things, and just with the guidance that you need to take care of certain things. And so we also looked very closely at the federal requirements, because it is important to a lot of families to be able to access Best Beginnings daycare subsidy to help with the cost of daycare. And we don't want to put that in jeopardy for anyone. So we meshed the federal requirements for the block grant and what the legislature has already determined is good enough for home daycares last session with the DOD rules, and tried to create a very streamlined package of rules for home daycares. And that would be a family home daycare for up to 8 children and a group daycare home, which is up to 15 children. So in small towns in Montana, that's really more viable than finding a giant daycare center. Daycare centers serve their purpose in our more urban cities, but our small towns don't have that. We need to make it so it's possible and attractive to someone to have childcare in their home. So that's the route we're trying to. It's difficult to please everyone with one package, and I think that was my biggest heartburn with the department's rules package. They tried to, I would say, not speaking for them necessarily, but streamline it by saying the rules apply to everybody, instead of saying this is one style of daycare, this is a separate style, which I think fits better for our very diverse communities in Montana.
Yes. Interesting. I would say on some level, it's kind of like the playing field was those Department of Defense rules, and then what the Department of Public Health and Human Services were, what they were wanting to accomplish, which was quite broad, quite expansive. My favorite page in the rules was one whole page on how to diaper a child. Well, that's pretty specific. You probably already know how to do that if you're running a home daycare. But on the other end, the rules over here said 6 inches of mulch under a swing set. Department of Defense rules over here said a safe outdoor play area. It was so broad. So if we could attach family daycares closer to Department of Defense, and on the other side say, what does the legislature truly want? Because that is not what we've been doing. These 95 pages of rules probably should have come in a 95-page bill for us to discuss, for us to talk about in committee. Well, now it's there. This bill will direct the rules, which is fully in the legislature's ability to do. And so on one hand, the family daycare bill really needs, just a majority to pass through. And I'm not sure how well received that will be by the governor. I think it'll be quite well received. On the other end is the rules that the Department of Public Health and Human Services really wasn't willing to discuss, wasn't really willing to negotiate. So now coming to the legislature, wanting lots of votes, enough to override a veto, wanting lots of buy-in from both the majority party and the minority party, is what that bill looks like. So that we can then say, this is what the legislature would like to do for daycare. That is really what we're wanting to do in that. With both of them, definitely, but with the rules particularly applies to both. The majority would apply to bigger daycares. And so that, for me, is the big stamp. What does the legislature want to do with daycare? What do we say Montana would like to see?
Yeah, and it's interesting also. I think people should know that Senator Lenz and I have both 2 years now have attended the Hunt Institute childcare. Well, they have a name for it. It's not really daycare because it's about early childhood learning and education and all sorts of topics that are on vogue right now. We all want to prepare our children for Harvard, and but at the same time, we know it. I mean, it's just a fact of life that children are best served the more time they can spend with their mother after they're born. I mean, we're mammals. That's not something crazy. We all agree that. And the second best place for them is in a long relationship with the caregiver where they can have a lot of one-on-one interaction and, feed and return and relationship building, and how they can develop in those first 3 years is so important. And a lot of times, unfortunately, in a bigger daycare, there's a lot of turnover with staff. And the infants and toddlers, in no way to denigrate what they're doing in a daycare center, it shouldn't be taboo to talk about how a child is much better off in a small home-like setting with one caregiver for a long period of time. And so I'm really passionate about giving children the best start. And I know that is bipartisan. I mean, we went to both of these conferences with a group from Montana with Democrat and Republican legislators, members from the department. Last year, there were a couple of mayors, I think, or county commissioners along. And we all agree on that one basic premise that we want what's best for children. We don't always agree on how specifically to get there, but I hope that we can present a product tomorrow that people can say, yeah, that's a really good idea. Man, I might not like this one thing super, it's not my favorite thing, but as a whole, it's a very good package. And maybe someone else says, yeah, I like it, except for this other thing that they do like and I don't like. And everybody can realize that the goal is to make it so our children have a safe place to be, where they're cared for and loved and fed and in a healthy place. And there are many ways to get there. Mm-hmm. It's one goal, but there's many paths. And even in the Montana law, when the Montana Daycare Act was first passed in the 80s, I thought it was interesting because typically if a bill has a bunch of whereas clauses at the beginning, those are not part of the law. They're not codified. In the end, the whereases are just, something nice for the floor debate. But on the Montana Daycare Act, those are codified in the law. And one of the things that I just keep going back to over and over is the legislative intent of that Daycare Act is to provide a variety of diverse options for parents to choose where to have their children that fits in their lifestyle, that fits in their town, that fits in their work schedule. And we're giving parents a choice. And in order to do that, we cannot have one-size-fits-all rules.
Yeah. That was, I'm thinking back to the story from the conference, which was very symbolic. There were two representatives. I won't say what states they were from. One, I think, had 3 kids, and had passed quite a bit of legislation out of their state, and did what they were both ladies, and one of them did what she had to do. She'd have a nanny, she'd have babysitters, she'd have relatives while she was in the legislature. The other one stated after 1 month of having her baby that she couldn't do it, and if her as a lawyer and her husband as a physicist couldn't do it, nobody could. And she sent her child to a daycare, and a little bit later, the person at the daycare said, boy, your child's doing really well with a spoon. And she said, spoon? It was so funny because she was letting the daycare raise her child. It was startling. Well, we're definitely not doing that with these bills. We're wanting to more like the first legislator that is giving them options. Certain towns in Montana have a shortage of daycare and difficulties to accomplish that. But if we're giving them different options, if it isn't all just a big daycare, but we've also added in the Montana idea of smaller daycares, family, friends, neighbor daycares, anything that would fill that gap, accomplish people to be able to work and be engaged with their children, really is where we're at with this. We're ready to go, aren't we?
I hope so. We've been at it for a long enough time, so it'll be nice to get that out to people so they can
Yes.
see what we're working on.
I look forward to what we can accomplish.